Greetings, my name is Eric, and I'm just going to briefly draw some lessons from Dalton's book, more specifically with a focus on the qualities or the character of the leader. Just reflecting on that particular chapter and going through it and reading it, there are a number of aspects that one has reflected on. Number one, on the ministry itself. And I think just one realization is that there is a high standard that is expected of every leader that is called into ministry. And Dalton really does drive that point. And as I was reflecting on that point and thinking about it, that there are specific qualifications that even one needs in order to step into ministry. Love, faith, and hope. But also there are other qualifications which are in the book of 1 Timothy chapter 3, and we could also say perhaps also Titus chapter 1, that not so much just focus on the gifting of this particular individual, but also focus on one's character. So the biblical text will tell us that, for example, that those who lead must be above reproach as well. And so just reflecting on what Dalton gives, this wonderful principle of this qualification, also to indicate, in fact, I think as I was reflecting that, it also speaks to the fact that perhaps that kind of role is not for everyone, that there is a specific and a high standard that is expected to those who are leading and who are given that responsibility to lead. And therefore, because there are specific qualifications, it may mean that perhaps there are those who may not be ready to step into that role, or may not be meeting some of those qualifications, and may in fact need to introspect themselves to say, where am I with regards to these qualifications as well. And I think there's often a push towards the gifting of the person rather than the character of the person. I think as Dalton continues to work through this book, just a realization that in fact we need both. So it's not either or, but we need both. But more specifically, we need character. And so, as someone who has led before, I'm leading in the township space where we faced many social ills in the township, and one of them, of course, being drugs, alcohol, and many other social fatherlessness and many other things. And so, as a pastor, you find yourself that you're playing multiple roles in multiple spaces as well. And there's a sense in which the community looks up to you in a manner in which you behave, in a manner in which you communicate and carry yourself before everyone. And so sort of that standard of the person who's leading, and the expectations, in fact, from the community itself in terms of what a Christian should look like, but more specifically in this context, how a pastor should carry themselves and perhaps how they should look like. And so there are other aspects which I think are quite important that I've reflected on in this particular chapter of qualifications. Is also the aspect of humility as well. The importance of humility, and this is a challenge in my own ministry, the challenge in my own walk with the Lord, about the spirit of humility and the need for humility. And I think often we can find ourselves doing so many things, and sometimes doing those things quite well, to such an extent feeling as though that we're doing those things in our own strength, in our own power, in our own abilities. And so as I begin to reflect on that, part of humility is the humility that I need as a person to realize that it is God who enables me, it is God who empowers me to be able to do that, but also to bring that spirit of humility also among us in our community, in our church, to actually walk in the spirit of humility. The other aspect that I think I pondered on in reading that chapter was the aspect of theology as well. And because there are aspects that relates to spiritual discipline, but also theology, and I'm going to actually link those two things. One, there is a sense in which at times theology is demonized. That people say we just need the Holy Spirit, we don't need theology. This is, we don't build churches with theology as well. And so there's a realization then that you have leaders that are malnourished, leaders that are not well equipped, not well trained, to be able to effectively lead the congregation, but also to be able to handle the biblical text in a manner that which it should, but also being able to divide the word of truth. And so at times you may find that the person does not have the skill nor the knowledge to be able to do that because they're not trained in doing that. And so how do we then take that and actually begin to change the mindsets of the people around us? In my own context, in the township context where I'm also affiliated, to be able to change that, to say we need more trained leaders, more trained pastors, that it is not to say that theology does not have the Holy Spirit, but in fact it's both. We need both theology and we need the enabling work of the Holy Spirit as well. And so this aspect of theology, but also including with that, in that quality of a leader, is the spiritual disciplines as well that are equally important, because these are the grace in which God gives us as means and ways in which we know Him. And when we read His Word and study His Word and devote ourselves to His Word and soak ourselves in His Word and praying and enjoying prayer, and just being reminded that if Jesus Himself, the Son of the living God, prayed and spent time praying in isolation, how much more should we then be doing that? And so reflecting on the character of leader, that there are many things that ought to shape me as a leader, that perhaps also are things that I need to be encouraging in my community and in my church as well. And so I think just in terms of my own application around this method is to think about how do I cultivate humility in my own walk with the Lord. How do I grow in spiritual disciplines to ensure that they are not just an optional extra, but they are part and parcel of my walk with the Lord, and in fact they are primary, not secondary. I think that the last thing would be to say, how do I then cultivate and bring in a culture whereby we are encouraging folk to get trained in our community, not so much at times just going to a theological school, but perhaps through apprentices in our own local churches, where we have rigorous curriculums and discipleship courses that our folk could go through. And so I think Dalton, for me, helped me to sort of think around that in reading that chapter on the qualifications of the leader, not just who they need to be, but also what they need to do for them to grow and mature in the ways of the Lord. Thank you.